At first glance, Death Valley is just a desert, a place of records, extreme heat, and endless salt marshes. But for some, it's the epicenter of weirdness. This is where it all began. When a group of hikers disappeared without a trace from the Keen Wonder mine in 1987, no one imagined that years later, a lone ranger would find clues that could overturn the official story. Tracks leading to chemical containers for official use tags and things that should have remained underground forever. And the deeper he dug, the clearer it became. This was not an isolated incident. In other parts of the country, in other national parks, events frighteningly similar. Rangers had encountered abandoned laboratories, secret Cold War programs, people who had disappeared without a trace. Today we've compiled 5 real-life stories based on reports, internal investigations, and personal testimonies from employees of the U.S. National Park Service stories, in which one step off the tourist trail becomes the beginning of an immersion into something that doesn't make it into the official brochures. Death Valley, White Sands, Yosemite, Joshua Tree, Denali. Different parks, different destinies. But they all have one thing in common, rangers who stayed true to duty even when the truth could have cost them their lives. There are places in Death Valley where even experienced rangers don't go. They are marked as dangerous areas on old maps, but few people know why. At the Keen Wonder mine, there are still signs saying no entry and rusty chains at the entrance. In the Ranger's report of the 16th of March 1987, there is a terse note. A 3-man hiking party at the north entrance is missing. The search continues. The group was never found. 10 years later, traces of the incident resurfaced in an unexpected place. My name is Jake Holt and I'm 40 years old. Prior to working for the National Park Service, I served in the U.S. Army, went through Iraq and Panama. After a divorce, life in the city became unbearable. Something had to change. So in 1995, I applied to the National Park Service. I worked in Yosemite for 2 years and then requested a transfer to Death Valley, the most isolated and rugged place I could find. Death Valley is a 13,500 square kilometer desert with an extreme climate. In summer, the temperature rises above 50 degrees centigrade. Tourists stick to the central routes, but much of the area remains sparsely visited. My area of responsibility is the northeastern sector of the park, including the abandoned mines and the deserted Eureka Plateau. The nearest ranger post is 70 kilometers away. Radio communications are unstable, especially in the canyons. In late February 1997, during a routine patrol of the Keen Wonder area, I noticed fresh tire tracks on a dirt road leading to an abandoned mine. It was alarming. The road was blocked off and entry had been prohibited for years. Someone had come here on purpose, and I had no idea at the time that what was found inside the mine would connect the park's past and present with one dangerous thread. February in Death Valley is the time for patrols in remote areas. On the 21st of February 1997, I checked out the abandoned mine area. The route was standard, a dirt track along Keen Wonder, then a diversion up the west slope and back to the track. At mile marker 157, something caught my eye. On this job, I learned to sense when something was wrong. It comes with experience, like a conditioned reflex. I stopped the Jeep, got out. Fresh tire tracks were clearly visible on the wet ground after a rare rain. Someone had turned onto a forbidden road. The temperature was about 10 degrees, a cool day by Death Valley standards. I checked the radio, just a rustle of static. Communication is always unstable in the canyons. I threw on my backpack and followed the trail. The Keen Wonder area is not listed in the tourist brochures. Abandoned gold mines, dangerous mines, time-torn structures. In 1976, after an accident, the area was closed. It is marked on the map as off-limits to visitors. The tracks led confidently to the entrance of the mine. The rusty chain had been carefully removed and set aside. No sign of forced entry, as if someone had a key. Found cigarette butts, a couple of plastic bottles. Someone had been here recently. I switched on the torch and moved inside. The smell of damp and metal. After 30 meters, the shaft split. Footprints of boots went to the left. In the side drift, I noticed a rucksack leaning against the wall. It was Army issue. Worn. I examined the contents. A map of Death Valley from 1985 with markings. A notebook with notes, yellowed photographs. One of them showed 3 men smiling at the camera. The inscription on the back read, Turner Expedition, March 1987, Death Valley. The last entries in the notebook are dated March 1987. We checked the coordinates. The vein should be in the northern branch. Joe thinks that the mine sites are not marked on the official plans deliberately. Strange metal containers in the side tunnel don't look like mining equipment. From there, the recordings cut off. Deeper down in the mine, I found signs of a recent stay, fresh boot prints, tripod tracks, cigarette butts. Someone had scrutinized the walls. In some places, there were fresh rock chips. In the far corner, I found a metal cylinder the size of a thermos, unmarked. Inside, there were traces of powder. Next to it lay an instruction manual with the stamp for official use and a fragment of text about the chemical mapping project. The date was 1978. As I walked outside, I noticed an old trailer half a mile from the entrance, artfully blended into the landscape. A pickup truck was parked nearby. The elderly man who opened the door identified himself as Robert Turner. He displayed an area permit issued by the Park Service. "Do you have anything to do with the 1987 expedition?" I asked. "That was my son, James. He led the group. 3 men, all missing." He handed the photograph back. 10 years have passed. At first I trusted the authorities, participated in the search, slept in a tent by the command post. A week, a month. Then the investigation was canceled. They said it was an accident, got lost, dehydration. "But you didn't believe it," was not the question. "There are too many gaps in the reports. The trail ends at the mine, but no one was found inside. Backpacks, gear, all gone. When I started asking questions about old military sites in the area, I was looked at like I was crazy. Then I realized that no one wanted to know the truth. Now I'm looking for it myself." I involuntarily touched the ranger's badge. The Park Service doesn't just abandon a search. If an investigation was closed, there was a good reason. Or someone wanted it closed. The walls of the trailer were hung with maps, photos, clippings. On the table were folders, magazines, rock samples. "They weren't looking for gold," Turner said. "My son was a geologist. He was interested in rumors of strange experiments in the 70s, about chemical tests in remote areas of the park. The group discovered something in a mine and disappeared." He showed documents, clippings about missing tourists, search reports, copies of inquiries. 3 days ago, some men came here. They called themselves gold prospectors, but they didn't have equipment for prospectors. GPR, chemical analyzers. They're looking for something, and it's not gold. As he left, Turner held out a phone number. "Be careful, son. What they left in those mines in the 70s is more dangerous than cave-ins or poisonous gases." Returning to the Jeep, I decided to examine the finds first before acting officially. My responsibility is the safety of the park and its visitors. In the evening, in the hut at the Grapevine Post, the finds were laid out. Turner's group's notebook described their route through the mine. The last entry confirmed that they had found something unusual, perhaps a secret chemical storehouse. The photos show young people full of enthusiasm. The container was tightly closed. I didn't risk opening it. From the window, I could see the stars over the desert, silence broken only by the crackling of the cooker. The radio transmitter came to life suddenly. "All stations. Received notification of a survey team heading to the Keen Wander area for a geological survey. Official authorization. 5 men, 2 SUVs. Arrival expected by noon tomorrow." I looked at the desk with the paperwork. The enthusiasts now had official authorization. Who are they? And what were they looking for in the mine where a group of explorers had disappeared 10 years ago? I needed to be at Keen Wanders tomorrow before this group showed up. The night was restless. The documents from my rucksack kept me awake. I got up at 5:30, still in the dark. While I made breakfast, I went over Turner's notes over and over again. Something didn't add up in the official version of their disappearance. By 6 in the morning, I was on my way. Dawn in Death Valley is always sudden. First gray twilight, then golden rays cut through the horizon and the desert comes alive. The temperature is 3 degrees and visibility is excellent. It took an hour to get to Keen Wander. I left the Jeep behind a rocky ledge, not visible from the road, but not too far away for a quick getaway. Turner's trailer was in place, smoke coming from its chimney. There was another car next to his pickup, an old Ford with California plates. Guests? I tightened my belt and holster. I'd learnt in the Army that it was better to be safe. Turner wasn't alone. In the trailer was a gray-haired man in his 60s, wearing a worn denim jacket. "This is Harris, former geologist," Turner introduced him. "Worked with the military in the 70s, retired now, but he remembers a few things." Harris studied me with the caution of a man used to keeping his mouth shut. "Turner said you found one of the containers," I confirmed. "The WG-17 series?" he asked. "Unmarked," I replied. "An experimental series, then," Harris grimaced. In 1978, binary chemical compounds were tested here, officially to develop new methods of geological exploration, in fact, a military program. They were studying how chemical markers diffuse in groundwater, how they interact with minerals. And something went wrong? I remembered the instructions with a vulture. The markers turned out to be too persistent. Instead of the planned decay period of 30 days, some compounds remained active for years. The program was scrapped, the facilities mothballed. Some of the materials were hidden in the mines, cheaper than shipping them out. Turner spread a map on the table. James and his group accidentally discovered one of these caches, probably decided to take the samples as evidence, but something happened. We don't know what it was. "And those people who came recently?" I asked. "I'm not sure, but 3 of them were definitely military. The posture, the way they talk. They know what they're looking for." Harris tapped his finger on the map. "And if they got official authorization, that means they have high-level support." I checked the time. It was less than 3 hours until the geological team arrived. "I need to take another look at the mine," I said, standing up. "Maybe they missed something." Harris held out a folded piece of paper to me. "A diagram of the main tunnels. Possible storage areas are marked there. Be careful. Some compounds will activate on contact with air." On the way out, Turner held me up. "You don't have to get involved in this, son. It's dangerous. These people have been hiding the truth about my son for 10 years. They'll stop at nothing." "I'm a ranger. This is my park and my responsibility," I replied, though anxiety was growing inside. What would I do if I ran into government cover? The mine was quiet and cool. Using Harris's diagram, I went deeper than I had gone yesterday. The main tunnel branched off to form a complex network of passages. There were chalk marks on the walls, some fresh, others old and faded. Someone was methodically exploring every nook and cranny. On the 3rd level in the side drift, I found fresh signs of excavation. Someone was removing an old rubble pile. Among the excavated stones, I noticed a rusty metal box with a chemical hazard sign. The lid had been cracked open and the contents were gone. Gloves and a respirator were lying nearby. In the next branch, I came across something strange. A metal door with a code lock, obviously recently installed. It didn't fit in with the ambiance of an abandoned mine. The lock was modern, electronic, with a code panel. After checking the time, I decided to go back. There was an hour left before the so-called researchers arrived. I had to think about what to do next. At the exit of the mine, I noticed that the radio was alive. The reception was weak, but it was possible to distinguish the conversations. Someone was coordinating the team's arrival, mentioning the Alpha 17 sector and the W series samples. It didn't sound like normal geological protocol. I was on my way to my Jeep when I heard the sound of approaching cars. Too soon. 2 unmarked black SUVs were coming down the road toward the mine. I had to retreat quickly into the thicket. The SUVs stopped at the entrance to the mine. 5 men in civilian clothes, but with a military appearance, got out. 2 were carrying cases with equipment. The 3rd, something like a special container for transporting hazardous substances. The 4th, obviously senior, was giving out instructions, checking a clipboard. The 5th stayed by the cars, scrutinizing the surroundings. I was able to take some pictures with a handheld camera issued by the Park Service to document violations. If something goes wrong, at least there is evidence. The group disappeared down the shaft. I retreated to the jeep, trying not to make any noise. I had to warn Turner. But when I got to the trailer, there was no one there. The door was ajar. The inside was a mess. Someone had obviously been looking for documents. There were papers scattered on the floor, a chair overturned. Turner's pickup was gone. Harris's car was gone. There was a hastily written note on the table. They came early. They have a photo of James from the W12 site. Evidence exists. Meet me at the agreed-upon location. What is a W12 facility? And where's the agreed-upon location? Turner was obviously counting on me to know what he was talking about. I remembered our conversation yesterday. He mentioned the old lookout at Zabriskie Point, the place where his son had taken the first photograph of the expedition. I gathered up the scattered documents. Among them, I found an old photograph of 3 men in protective suits at the entrance to some underground structure. On the back was a stamp, Project Chimera, 1,978 inches and a handwritten signature. Samples extracted, vault mothballed, W12 under control. The walkie-talkie came to life again. All units, attention. Message for Ranger Holt. Return to Grapevine Base immediately. Federal officials have arrived. Requesting immediate rendezvous. Repeat. I switched off the radio. The feds are already at the base. That was fast. So the researchers weren't the only problem. Standing in the middle of the trashed trailer, I realized that the decision I made now would change everything. Follow protocol and return to base, or face Turner and learn the truth about what had happened to his son. The decision came naturally. I got in the jeep and headed for Zabriskie Point. The truth about the Keen Wander mine was too important to be buried for another 10 years. The road to Zabriskie Point looped between ochre-colored rocks. The thermometer read 18 degrees. The walkie-talkie at minimum volume intermittently transmitted, "All units, Ranger Holt is not responding to calls. If located, report coordinates." 15 years in the Army, 2 years in the Park Service, and here I was ignoring orders. But Turner's words rang in my head. No one wants to know the truth. There weren't many tourists at Zabriskie Point. Remembering the old lookout that existed before the 80s renovations, I walked down the overgrown trail and found Turner with binoculars. "Where's Harris?" I asked. "Gone to Las Vegas to see some trusted journalists." Turner lowered the binoculars. "You've made your decision. I want to know the truth. Then I'll decide what to do with it." He pulled a tattered folder out of his rucksack. Copies of James's papers, the real ones, not the ones left in the trailer for diversion. The folder contained photos of the underground lab, copies of memos, schematics of technical devices. Project Chimera began in 1975, Turner said quietly. Developing chemical compounds with special properties, officially for geological exploration. Actually a new class of chemical warfare agents capable of penetrating standard defenses. Tested here because of the isolation and variety of geological conditions. He showed a map with the points marked. 12 ranges. W12 is the last and most serious. The Keen Wander mine is a storage facility for samples and equipment. The program was curtailed in 1982 because of international agreements. But the samples weren't destroyed. They were mothballed. And your son's group found this vault in 1987? James has been studying anomalous geological formations. He heard of strange occurrences at Keen Wander, got permission for an expedition and stumbled across the project's traces. Turner handed me a printout of the email, confirming that the 1987 incident has been cleared. Turner's team has been interned since the discovery of the W12 site. Witnesses have been isolated and materials confiscated. Recommend Operation Clean Sheet to prevent spill. Now they're opening up the vault again. Maybe technology allows them to safely extract the samples. Maybe the international situation has changed, but they'll cover their tracks for sure. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a helicopter. A heavy Chinook was approaching the Keen Wander area. "Evacuation," Turner said. "Whatever they found is being hauled away right now. I need to get back, warn them of the danger. They're aware of it. Why do you think they have special defense class containers? But you decide for yourself." "And you?" I asked. I have a meeting with Harris and his press contact. This story mustn't go away. On the way to the mine, I noticed a cordon. An SUV was blocking the road. People in uniforms without insignia were checking documents. I turned onto an old geological road that led to the eastern slope. It overlooked the mine site, 3 black SUVs, a helicopter, men in hazmat suits carrying containers. Through my binoculars, I could make out the familiar markings on one container, the same as on Harris's diagram. Series WG-17, unstable specimens. I pulled out my radio, switched to the emergency channel. Central, this is Holt. Code 1023. Possible chemical threat in the Keene-Vander area. Evacuation of civilians within a 3-mile radius is required. Holt, what's your location? Stand by. I gave the coordinates and described the situation without mentioning Turner. The park's security protocol took precedence over any covert operations. Soon the park's response force swarmed to the area. A helicopter hastily took off with the containers. I made my way to the checkpoint where the leadership was already assembled. I was met by Chief of Security Richardson and 2 men with Home Office badges. "You disrupted an authorized research mission without grounds," Richardson began. "I have grounds." I laid out Turner's documents and photos of the operation. They were extracting samples of the WG-17 series, unstable chemical compounds. The mine contains the Project Chimera Vault, a high-risk facility. The men in plain clothes glanced around. "Where did you get this information?" "From a man whose son disappeared there 10 years ago under similar circumstances." I showed photos of Turner's group and a printout about interned witnesses. "It's my responsibility to keep the park safe. It's my job." "You're suspended from duty during the investigation," one of the feds said. An hour later, a chemical defense team arrived. The Keene-Wander neighborhood was cordoned off. The news report said it was a technical accident. That evening, while packing up the cabin, I heard the phone ring. "Do you have copies?" Turner's voice. "Photographed everything, and there's a witness statement." "Good. Harris has met with the reporter. The story will come out tomorrow," said Turner. "I'm going to have to leave the service." "I know. But you did the right thing, son. Some secrets are too dangerous to stay buried." Stepping out onto the porch, I looked up at the moon casting a silvery light over the desert. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. I didn't know what was in store for me tomorrow, but for the first time in a long time, I felt I had done the right thing. Death Valley holds many secrets, and some of them should remain under lock and key, and some shouldn't. After the events of February, a lot changed. My service in the national parks ended with an official at-will resignation. 6 weeks after the events, the Keene-Wander mine was completely closed. The entrance was concreted over, and the area was enclosed by a new fence with motion sensors. The official version, critical condition of structures, threat of collapse. A congressional commission launched an investigation, but most of the documents about Project Chimera were inaccessible for national security reasons. Nevertheless, we have made some progress. In July, a large-scale project on ecological monitoring of groundwater was launched in Death Valley. Officially, for scientific purposes. Unofficially, to make sure that chemicals have not spread outside the mine. The most unexpected was a visit from a representative of the Ministry of Defense in August. He offered me a job as a consultant on so-called environmental safety. I declined, but that spoke volumes. Turner got access to some of the archives. Officially, his son and his group are missing, but now he has at least part of the truth. We meet once a month at Zabriskie Point. He's aged over the year, but there's something new in his gaze, not calm, more like acceptance. Yesterday, he said, "You know, Jake, certainty is worse than uncertainty, but the truth is better than both. I'm going on a job interview tomorrow in Colorado. Private ranger service in a national forest. New chapter. After all, every ranger knows. Sometimes you have to leave a familiar route and take a new one. Death Valley remains in my past, but not its lessons. Some secrets must be revealed, whatever the cost." "A group of 3 men are missing," were the words Ranger Alex McKenzie heard as he barely crossed the threshold of the Highland Station at Talkeetna. The base chief looked worried. In Alaska in late October, The disappearance of climbers rarely ended well, especially when the route through Denali Pass was involved. A storm had hit the high mountain ranger station in Denali National Park. The first serious snowfall of the season made it clear. Winter had come to Alaska earlier than usual. The snow outside the window didn't stop, and the thermometer read -20. Alex was looking through the logbook when there was a knock on the station door. A frozen man in his 30s with a weathered face stood on the doorstep. "My name is Neil Harris. My sister Carol is in Robert Finch's band. They were supposed to be back yesterday." Alex frowned. Robert Finch, an experienced climber and guide, went out on the Denali Pass route with his client James Taylor and climber Carol Harris. This happened 10 days ago. Denali Pass is the most dangerous section on the way to the summit of McKinley. "They haven't been in touch for 3 days," Neil continued, holding a photo of his sister. "The park office says the rescue operation won't be launched until tomorrow morning, weather permitting." Alex looked out the window. The weather wouldn't permit it, and they both realized that. "Why Denali Pass?" asked Alex. "The end of October is not the time for such a route," Robert insisted. "This is his last attempt to return to big climbing after his injury. A magazine contract is at stake," Neil replied. Alex touched his jacket pocket where an old compass lay. 3 years ago, he had already lost a man on that pass, his partner, because of his own mistake. His superiors had decided to wait for the weather to improve, but it was clear to everyone that the climbers had almost no chance. Perhaps in the spring, when the snow melts, they will find the bodies. But for now, there was no point in risking the searchers. Alex did not sleep at night. The words of his ex-wife, said during the divorce, "You're never around when you're really needed," resounded in his head. He methodically checked his equipment, studied weather reports, looked at maps. At dawn, while the station was still asleep, Alex left a note on the duty officer's desk and loaded the equipment into the service snowmobile. He had a day's head start before the search officially began, and a little more, before the start of the strongest storm, which was already approaching the Alaska Range. Alex's snowmobile was making its way through the snow-covered Toklat Valley. Visibility was no more than 30 meters, enough to follow the route but too little for comfort. The temperature had dropped to -25. Alex checked the GPS navigator and slowed down. The climbing route of Finch's group started at 2,200 meters. From there, the climbers were to ascend to the base camp at 3,300 meters, and then, weather permitting, continue to the infamous Denali Pass at 5,500 meters. This route usually took 5-6 days round trip. Alex stopped the snowmobile at the foot of the first serious climb. The rest of the way was on foot. He took the radio out of the luggage compartment. "Talkeetna Base, over. This is Mackenzie." The radio crackled before he heard the duty officer's voice. "Mackenzie, what the hell? Where are you?" "Initiated a search operation. I have reached the entry point for the eastern route." "Are you out of your mind? The brass is pissed. Get back here now." "I'll be in touch every 2 hours. If I miss a session, launch an official search. Stand down." Alex switched off the radio without waiting for a reply. He knew he was breaking protocol, but this was his chance to correct a past mistake. He put on a rucksack with basic equipment, first aid kit, sleeping bag, food for 3 days, extra clothes, emergency beacon. He strapped a satellite phone, compass, torch, and knife to his belt. On my shoulder, I hung a carbine with mountaineering equipment. The first section of the climb went without problems. The snow was deep, but the snowshoes held well. The slope was not very steep yet. Alex walked slowly, taking measured breaths and scanning the terrain. Every 100 meters of ascent, he left visible orange markers to mark his way in case the weather deteriorated. After 3 hours of climbing, Alex reached an altitude of 2,950 meters. The blizzard had intensified and the wind began to howl between the rock ledges. Visibility dropped to 15 meters. Alex took a break, took out a flask with hot tea, and looked at the wrist altimeter. There were about 350 meters of ascent to the supposed base camp of the group. He switched on the radio for a scheduled communications session. "Talkeetna Base, this is Mackenzie. Reaching altitude 2,950. Visibility is dropping. Continuing ascent to base campsite. Over." "Roger, Mackenzie. Weather Service reports the storm is intensifying. Go back, that's an order. I'll contact you in 2 hours. Stand down. Alex continued his ascent. Now the slope was steeper, and it was necessary to choose each step carefully. The wind threw snow in his face. The frost crept through the seams of his clothes. After another hour of hard climbing, Alex noticed an unusual shape ahead under a layer of snow. As he got closer, he realized that it was an abandoned tent, almost completely covered with snow. A half-filled rucksack was visible nearby. Alex dug it out and found inside personal belongings and documents in the name of James Taylor, one of the group members. As he looked around, he noticed tracks going higher up the slope. The tracks were partially covered with snow, but still distinguishable. Judging by the depth and size, 3 people had walked here about 2 days ago. Alex looked up at the sky. It was about 4 hours until dark, and the weather continued to deteriorate. He made a note with the coordinates of the find in the navigator and continued following the trail. The trail led upwards for about another kilometer before turning to the eastern wall. There, the tracks broke off at the entrance to a narrow crevice. Alex shined his torch inside. It was not just a crevice, but a natural ice cave about 15 meters deep. "Is anyone there?" Alex shouted, entering the cave. "Denali Park Rescue!" The torch's beam picked out 3 silhouettes from the darkness at the back of the cave. At first, no one answered. Then a woman's voice was heard. "Here! We're here!" Alex hurried towards them, bypassing the icy stalactites hanging from the ceiling. At the far wall, he saw 3 climbers. A woman, apparently Carol Harris, sat next to a man wrapped in a sleeping bag and several jackets. It was James Taylor. His face was pale, his lips blue. A third man, Robert Finch, stood against the opposite wall of the cave, holding a map. "Thank God," Carol exhaled. "James broke his leg 2 days ago. He's suffering from hypothermia and needs to be evacuated." Alex knelt down beside the injured man and checked his pulse. It was weak, but steady. Opening the first aid kit, he pulled out a thermal blanket and wrapped James with it over the sleeping bag. "There will be an evacuation, but not now," Alex said. "There's a big storm coming. No one will be able to get up here or send a helicopter for at least 2 days. "We can continue climbing," Robert suddenly said. "The peak is only a day away." Alex looked at him incredulously. "Climbing? Your comrade is in critical condition. The storm is starting, and you're talking about climbing?" "We can't miss this opportunity," Robert insisted. "I've already contacted the magazine. They're waiting for a story about the winter climb of Denali." "There won't be a winter climb," Alex cut him off. "Our task is to wait until the storm is over and evacuate the victim." He turned to Carol. "What about supplies?" She shook her head. "There's almost nothing left. Robert said we'd be up and down in no time. We didn't count on such a delay." "He didn't tell us he took less food to lighten the load," James added in a weak voice. "We only found out about it when we started cooking dinner on the second day." Alex looked at Robert, who turned away and pretended to study the cave wall. "I brought food and medicine," Alex said, taking off his rucksack. "It's enough for a couple of days if we save money. We need to look at James's leg." He carefully freed the injured leg of the victim. James grimaced at the pain. Even through the climber's tight trousers, he could see that the shin was unnaturally bent. "It's a fractured tibia," Alex said. "The bones haven't torn through the skin, that's good. But we need to make a proper splint." He pulled medical splints and painkillers from the first aid kit. "This will help until the evacuation, but in the hospital you'll need surgery." While Alex was tending to the injured, Robert paced nervously around the cave, occasionally looking outside. "Okay," Alex finally said. "I need to contact the base and let them know I found you. James needs to evacuate as soon as the weather permits." He switched on the radio but heard only the crackle of static. Then he tried the satellite phone. Same result. "The storm is getting worse," Alex said. "Communications are down. We'll have to wait out the storm here and hope for a signal tomorrow." Alex looked at James, at Carol, then looked at Robert. This was a critical situation, and they had a very difficult 24 hours ahead of them, possibly 2. And while James and Carol seemed to realize the seriousness of the situation, Robert's look said otherwise. It bothered Alex more than the impending storm. The wind outside the cave walls was a monotonous hum. The temperature hovered around -15, tolerable for moving, but dangerous for the exhausted James. Alex put out the gas burner and set out a walk of snow. "Fuel must be saved," he said. "Hot food once a day, the rest of the time, minimum water." Carol nodded, covering her brother with her jacket. Robert sat back, tapping nervously on the icy wall. "How long are we going to sit here?" he asked. "Until the storm subsides, 24 hours at least." "And if it doesn't die down, a week? Storms like this don't last weeks, usually 48 hours tops." Robert stood up and walked towards the exit, gazing out into the blizzard. "I could make it to the top and back in that time." Alex remained silent and busied himself with examining the cave. It was 15 meters deep and about 3 meters wide. At the far end there was a natural niche protected from drafts. "James needs to be moved there," Alex pointed out. Together with Carol, they moved the injured man. James groaned painfully with every movement. "How much food do you have left?" Alex asked. "A couple of energy bars and some dried fruit," Carol answered. Robert said, "We're taking a light load for the speedy ascent." "In October, on Denali? It's suicide even in perfect weather." He convinced us," James said quietly. "He said the forecast was perfect, that the magazine needed pictures of an unconventional climb, paid in advance." "My rucksack is designed for 3 days for one person," Alex said. "For 4 people in economy mode will be enough for a day and a half at most." The water boiled. Alex handed out bags of freeze-dried food to everyone. "James needs more," he added. "He's losing a lot of energy due to the injury and the cold." After dinner, Alex tried again to contact the base. Neither the radio nor the satellite phone worked because of the storm. "How serious is it?" Carol asked. "Pretty serious," Alex answered honestly. "If I hadn't found you, the chances would have been minimal. They're higher now, but everything depends on the weather and our actions." "Does the base know where to look?" Carol asked. "A rough direction. I left a note and the coordinates. As soon as the storm subsides, they'll start searching." "If we're still here by then," Robert intervened. "I suggest we don't wait for death. We need to keep moving." "Where? Into the storm? In -30 and 100 kilometers of wind?" "To the top. We're almost there." "You're 1,500 meters from the summit, with an injured comrade, no food, in the middle of a storm. It's not almost there. It's almost to the grave. James will stay here. Carol and I will go up and come back." "No," Carol said firmly. "I'm not leaving James." "Fine, then I'll go alone." Robert headed for his rucksack. Alex blocked his way. "Nobody's going anywhere. We're all staying here." "Don't tell me what to do," Robert snapped. "I am the leader of this expedition." "The expedition was over when I found you. This is a rescue mission now, and I'm in charge." Robert tried to get around Alex. He got in the way again. "You don't understand." Robert's voice became pleading. "This is my last chance. No one has taken me on any serious climb since my injury. This contract is all I have left. Your contract isn't worth 3 lives." "I knew you wouldn't understand." Robert shoved Alex sharply and lunged for the backpack. Alex staggered but held his ground and grabbed Robert by his jacket. He turned round and punched Alex in the face. A struggle ensued in the cramped space of the cave. "Stop it!" Carol shouted. "You're crazy!" Alex intercepted Robert's arm, pawed it, and pinned him against the wall. "Calm down. Think of your mates. They knew what they were getting into. No one promised a walk in the park. Why did you take so little food? Why didn't you tell them? The extra weight would have slowed us down." "I was counting on a quick climb." Alex let go of him and stepped back, staying alert. "You're not leaving here until the storm is over. That's out of the question." Robert looked at him hatefully, but he didn't resist any longer. He sat down against the opposite wall, defiantly turning away from the group. Alex wiped the blood from his lip and sat down next to James. The situation reminded him of the events of 3 years ago. Back then, he'd been on Denali with his partner Mike, conducting a rescue mission. Mike had insisted on splitting up and covering a larger area. Alex, as the senior, agreed, although protocol did not recommend it. The weather took a sharp turn for the worse. Mike did not make contact. Alex tried to find him without success. The body was not discovered until spring. "You're never around when you're really needed," his wife said before the divorce. She wasn't just referring to work, but also to the fact that he wasn't there for Mike when he needed him. "Is everything all right?" Carol asked quietly. "Yeah," Alex lied. Just assessing the situation. It was almost 7 in the evening. It was getting dark outside, and the storm was getting worse. We need to organize a watch, Alex said. Someone has to keep an eye on James and keep the heat on. I'll take the first shift, then you. He nodded to Carol. Robert will have to be on duty too. I'm not doing anything, he cut him off. I'd be halfway to the top by now if it weren't for you. And we'd be halfway to the grave by now if it weren't for Alex, Carol replied sharply. Alex began to prepare for the night. The temperature was dropping as darkness fell. He pulled out an emergency thermal blanket for James, then took off his down jacket and laid it on top. What about you? James asked. I've got thermal underwear and a fleece, Alex replied. I'll keep moving. It'll keep me warm. He knew he was taking a risk by giving the jacket, but realized that without the extra warmth, James might not survive the night. You should get some sleep too, Carol said. I can take the first watch. I'll sleep later. Right now we need to monitor the situation. Alex feared that Robert might do something while the others were asleep. A man in desperation is capable of recklessness. Alex sat at the entrance, rubbing his arms and legs to keep warm. He stared into the raging darkness and clutched his dead partner's compass in his hand, as if it could show him the way through this storm, not just the meteorological one, but the one raging inside him. Alex woke up to the pain in his fingers. Without his down jacket, the cold was getting to his bones. Stretching his arms, he looked at the clock. 6:15 in the morning. Carol was dozing against the wall next to her brother. James slept restlessly, his breathing frequent, a sign of advanced hypothermia. Robert sat in his corner with his eyes closed. The storm hadn't stopped. It sounded stronger. Alex looked outside. The wind instantly burned his face. The snow was so dense that nothing could be seen within 2 meters. He covered the entrance with a snow block, leaving a ventilation slit. How's it going in there? Carol asked, opening her eyes. The blizzard's still blowing. How's James? His fever's up. He'd been delirious during the night. Alex checked James's pulse, weak and frequent. His forehead is hot. Fever combined with frostbite was a dangerous sign. We need to give him antibiotics, Alex said, pulling out the pills. And try to keep him warm. Is he dying? Carol asked bluntly. Not if we get out tonight. But there's not much time. Robert opened his eyes. I told you we should have gone yesterday. Where? You'd have frozen to death in half an hour. I'd rather die on the way to the top than turn to ice here. How about not dying at all? Carol replied sharply. Alex switched on the radio. There was still only a crackle in the speaker. The satellite phone didn't work either. He handed out the last of the food packets, leaving himself a smaller portion. After that, only emergency chocolate and candy bars remained. They'll be looking for us after the storm, Alex said. I have an emergency beacon. As soon as the connection improves, I'll activate it. Morning turned today, but it was dark as twilight outside. The storm had been going on for over 24 hours. The temperature inside the cave stayed around -20. Alex tended to James, rubbing his limbs periodically. The fever didn't subside. Carol helped, but the fatigue and stress were taking their toll, and she was falling into a stupor more and more often. At some point, Alex noticed Robert standing at the exit again. The wind seems to be dying down, the man said. Alex walked over. Indeed, the howling of the storm was not so deafening. He switched on the radio again. A faint voice came through the interference. Talkeetna Base, anyone? Come in. Talkeetna Base, this is Mackenzie. Come in. Mackenzie. Barely audible. Coordinates. I've got a team. One of them is badly wounded. We're on the east slope in a cave at 3,500. Activating beacon. There was no response, but even that was enough. Communication was being reestablished. The storm was abating. Alex activated the emergency beacon. The device started flashing red LED, sending a signal with GPS coordinates. Will they find us? Carol asked. Yes. The signal can be received up to 100 kilometers away. How long will it take? If the weather improves, the helicopter could be there in 2 or 3 hours. Or 2 or 3 days. Or never, Robert snorted. Shut up, Carol said tiredly. Alex looked outside. The blizzard was abating. Visibility had increased to a few dozen meters. The gaps between the clouds told that the storm was receding. They spent the next 2 hours waiting in suspense. James would regain consciousness, and then pass out again. Around 11, Alex heard the rumble of an engine. At first, he thought it was a hallucination, but the sound became clearer. "Helicopter!" he shouted. "They found us!" Carol jumped up, a glint of hope in her eyes. Even Robert looked up. Alex pulled out a bright orange-colored smoke bomb. "I'll set off the signal. Prepare James for transport." He stepped out of the cave. A helicopter with the National Park Service emblem was circling a couple of kilometers away, trying to locate the source of the beacon signal. Alex activated the checker and placed it in an open area. Orange smoke rose upwards, clearly visible against the snow. He started waving his arms around. The helicopter noticed the signal and changed direction. A few minutes later, it hovered 50 meters from the cave. The place was too narrow to land, so 2 rescuers with stretchers were lowered down. "Alex!" shouted one of them. "Are you all right?" It was Dave Collins, his colleague. "I'm fine. There are 3 in the cave, 1 with a fracture and severe hypothermia. Condition is critical." Rescuers quickly entered the cave and began preparing James for transport. "We'll evacuate the injured man and the woman first," Dave commanded. "Then we'll come back for you." "I'm in charge here," Robert intervened. "I need to be evacuated first." "Protocol prioritizes the condition of the casualties," Dave said. James and Carol were prepared for evacuation. Carol gave Alex a hug before they left. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved us." They were hoisted aboard a helicopter that headed straight for Fairbanks. "The helicopter will take them to the hospital," Dave said. "Then it'll come back for you. It'll take about an hour." "What happened to your jacket?" he asked, noticing that Alex was wearing only a fleece. "Gave it to the victim." "You're stubborn. Here, take it." Dave held out a spare jacket. "You're on the verge of hypothermia yourself." The helicopter returned an hour later. Dave contacted the pilot and learnt that James and Carol had been successfully transported to the hospital. On the way back, Alex was silent, looking at the mountain ranges. Somewhere out there, 3 years ago, he had lost his partner, a mistake that couldn't be undone. But today, he had managed to save 3 lives. Maybe it was not redemption, but a step towards reconciliation with himself. When he arrived at the base, he had a serious conversation with his superiors. "You broke every protocol," said the park supervisor, "but you saved those people. There will be an internal affairs investigation." "I'm prepared for the consequences," Alex replied. After filling out the reports, he was sent to Fairbanks Hospital. He was diagnosed with hypothermia and placed in the room next to the one where James was treated. "The surgery went well," the nurse said. "Your climber's life is out of danger." "He's not my climber," Alex smiled. "But I'm glad." As he fell asleep under the influence of medication, he thought about his partner's compass. Maybe it had pointed the right way, not to the top of the mountain, but to what really mattered. Alex reread the letter that had arrived a week ago. "James has fully recovered from his surgery. The doctors say he will be able to walk without crutches by spring. We both realize that if it hadn't been for you, things could have ended very differently. Robert has stopped mountaineering. I recently learned that he's taken a job as an instructor at a ski school in Colorado. Maybe that's a good thing. As for me, the experience changed a lot of things. Perhaps I will return to the mountains someday, but definitely not on Denali and not in October. With endless gratitude, Carol Harris." Alex folded the letter and tucked it away in his breast pocket. Today was the first time he'd been out on full patrol since the incident. A command investigation had resulted in a reprimand for breach of protocol, resulting in the saving of human life. His superiors understood the situation as well as he did. The rucksack was packed, the snowmobile was fueled. Alex took Mike's compass out of his pocket, as he did before every time he went out on the trail. It used to be a ritual of guilt and a reminder of a mistake. Now it was something else. Before leaving, Alex called his ex-wife for the first time in months. The conversation was short but not tense. She agreed to let the kids spend part of the Christmas holidays with him. He walked out of the base building, got on his snowmobile, and started the engine. There was a long day of patrolling ahead, and someone might need help again. My name is Jack Brown. On the 15th of September 1988, I took my regular shift in the Mariposa Grove section of Yosemite National Park. At that time, I was 43 years old. I had served in the U.S. Navy from 1970 to 1982. Many people ask how a former sailor ended up among the giant sequoias in California. I usually answer that I've always loved nature. In reality, it's simpler and more complicated at the same time. I didn't join the Navy out of a great love for the sea. When I was 17, I stole my neighbor's car, an old Chevrolet, and smashed it to pieces on a country road. Could have gone to jail, but the neighbor was an ex-Marine. Instead of reporting it to the police, he made me promise to quit hooliganism and go into the service. "The Navy will teach you discipline," he said at the time. He wasn't wrong. 12 years of service straightened my character, taught me to take responsibility for my actions and to think before acting. After leaving the Navy in 1982, I was looking for a place to start over. The National Park Service gave me just that, a fresh start away from the memories of cold seas and long trips. Yosemite is more than just a national park. It's 1,200 square miles of wilderness, where ancient sequoias are juxtaposed with granite monoliths and hiking trails are lost in endless mountain ranges. My section in the southern part of the park included groves of giant sequoias, some of which are more than 2,000 years old. A ranger's job here is to patrol the trails, enforce the rules, assist hikers, and stay alert for emergencies. In 10 years of service, I've grown accustomed to the measured rhythm of patrols, standardized reports, and the occasional incident. Poachers, lost hikers, minor offenses, nothing out of the ordinary. On the morning of the 20th of September, I received a radio message to check the area near Glacier Point. Hikers had reported strange sounds and damage on one of the secondary trails. The standard procedure was to inspect, photograph, report. I packed the usual gear: radio, Canon AE-1 film camera, first aid kit, torch, water and dry rations. On my belt, a knife, and of course a service revolver. In my rucksack, I added a rope and spare batteries. In the mountains, you never know what you might need. At 8:30 a.m., I was out on the trail towards Glacier Point. A September morning in the mountains is always a lottery. It can be clear and sunny, and an hour later it's all foggy. We were lucky that day. Visibility was excellent. The temperature was about 15 degrees, and there was a light westerly wind. The first 2 hours of the trip passed without incident. I moved along the familiar trail, noting the condition of the signposts and information boards. Everything was fine until I reached a bend at an old pine tree that the rangers used as a landmark. There I saw strange footprints that led me to a place that wasn't on any map of the park. At the old pine tree, the trail diverged in two directions. The main route led to the observation deck, while a narrow side path led into the thicket between the rocks. It was there that I noticed fresh scratches in the granite surface, deep furrows, as if someone had dragged a heavy metal object. Broken manzanita branches and stripped bark lay nearby. The marks were no older than 2 days. I took pictures, marked the coordinates, and reported the change of route to the dispatcher. The side path led steeply upward between granite boulders. The scratches were becoming more distinct. Someone was definitely dragging something in that direction. After half a kilometer of climbing, the path led to a small plateau between rocks. A metal hatch was visible in a crevice, partially hidden by rocks and vegetation. The hatch was ajar. Scratches stretched out from here. On the surface was a barely legible inscription: U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, 1952. Nearby, empty tin cans without labels and scraps of rope. I took off my rucksack, switched on my torch, and looked inside. A metal staircase led down into the darkness. It was against the rules to go down alone, but if someone was trespassing in the park, I had to stop them. The stairs led to a concrete room with a metal table and army crates. On the table was an open container the size of a shoebox. Inside were neat stacks of books in waterproof packaging: Series B Cryptographic Handbook, U.S. Army Communications Service, 1962, disposable encryption blocks, a secret. Even without being an expert, I realized that in 1988 these books could cost serious money. Not for the Army, the codes were outdated. but for collectors or people with dubious intentions, significant value. Photographed the contents without touching them. In other boxes, I found 1950s field rations and empty .45 caliber shell casings. Cold War bunker. When I went upstairs, I found a temporary camp in the bushes. The fire had gone out, the grass was crumpled, and there were traces of a tent. The coals were still warm. "Who the hell is in here?" I heard a voice behind me. I turned round with my hand on my revolver. From behind a boulder came a man in his 50s wearing a worn military jacket. He was thin, gray beard, attentive eyes. "Ranger Brown. Who are you?" "Charlie's fine. I live around here." He nodded towards the woods. "I saw you coming down to the bunker. You can tell by the attitude. Military. Vietnam. Couldn't fit in afterwards." "Listen, Ranger," Charlie grew serious. "I don't know what you found in there, but you better forget about this place. The bunker attracts greedy people, and greedy people are dangerous." "What do you know about this bunker?" "It's where they kept valuable military stuff. Rumors have been going around for 10 years, but it's only recently that we've taken a serious interest. A guy from Merced came by asking about the military installations. Said he collected Cold War history, but you could tell from his eyes he wasn't a historian." "When was that?" "A week ago. And the day before yesterday I saw 2 young men with rucksacks, early 20s, from the valley. They opened the hatch. Why wasn't the Park Service notified?" Charlie looked away. "I have my own reasons for avoiding contact with the authorities, but I'm telling you honestly, there'll be more here. They're willing to pay big money for what's in the bunker, and where there's big money, there's big trouble." He headed towards the forest. "Take the advice of an old soldier. If you find something valuable, hand it over to your superiors and forget it. Not every treasure is worth the risk." Charlie disappeared into the trees. I was left with an open hatch and a lot of questions. I was supposed to call in a technical team and make a report, but something was stopping me. The words about the big money came back to my mind with a sudden thrill of interest. The ranger's salary had never been large, and lately the expenses had only increased. The old trailer needed repairs, the Jeep was starting to malfunction, and the numbers in the bank account were getting smaller and smaller. I closed the hatch, covering it with rocks. I radioed back that the patrol had been completed without any major violations. I kept quiet about the bunker for now. At home and reference books confirmed suspicions. U.S. Army cryptographic codes from the 1960s were valuable to collectors. On the black market, their price could reach tens of thousands of dollars per set, enough to solve financial problems, enough to start a new life. For the next 2 days I worked as usual, but my thoughts kept returning to the bunker. Tension was building inside. Sooner or later, a decision would have to be made: ranger duty or his own future. In the morning, I woke up with a heavy head and a strange feeling, as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice. All night I dreamed the same scenes: opening a metal container, counting stacks of dollars, buying a new house. And then suddenly I found myself handcuffed, being led under escort, and the park superintendent tearing off my ranger badge. At breakfast, I was calculating possible sums of money: $100,000 for a set of cryptographic codes, a figure from a military antiques guide. The workday was spent in a rescue operation. A group of hikers got lost in the Washington-Colum area. By evening, after leading them to the main trail, I felt relieved. The work distracted me from my obsessive thoughts, but at home, over dinner, my thoughts returned. I took out a calculator and started counting. 100,000, 3 years of my salary. I could buy a normal house instead of a trailer, repair the Jeep, go to Alaska. On the other hand, I took an oath upon entering the service to protect and preserve natural and historical values. Military ciphers belong to historic properties. The 24th of September was rainy. Gray clouds hung over the mountains. Visibility dropped to a few hundred meters. A storm warning was broadcast on the radio. Showers until Sunday. No one would get to the bunker. I had time to think. I sat in the office with reports, but the letters were blurred before my eyes. My thoughts kept coming back to the same question: What is more important, principles or practical benefits? By lunchtime, I realized that I would not be able to work today. There was too much noise in my head. On Saturday, the 25th of September, the rain stopped. Went on patrol, taking the route past the bunker. Officially, to check the trails after a downpour. Unofficially, to make sure nobody got to the hatch. The climb was more difficult. The rain had eroded the path, and the rocks were slippery. The bunker was untouched, no fresh footprints. I sat down on a boulder with a thermos of coffee. In 10 years of service, I've seen all sorts of things. Poachers ready to kill the last bear for profit. Tourists leaving rubbish behind for the sake of beautiful photos. Developers dreaming of turning nature into a resort. All of them were guided by the principle of personal gain over the public good. But do I think differently now? On the other hand, the ciphers have been in the ground for 30 years. The army has forgotten. Historians don't know. What harm would it do if they went to a collector? The decision made itself. I'll be back tonight with my camera. I'll take pictures of all the pages. Collectors will pay less for the copies, but still decent money. I'll give the originals to my bosses. Compromise. I'll remain an honest ranger, but I'll be compensated. The whole day was spent in nervous anticipation. Checked batteries, charged torches, planned the route. Towards evening it started to rain, a light drizzle that would hide my activities. At 10:30, I got out of the trailer. In my rucksack, I had a film camera, 3 torches, batteries, and films. I had a knife and a revolver on my belt in case I met with greedy people. Climbing in the dark and the rain proved more difficult. The wet rocks turned into a skating rink. I reached the bunker around midnight. No one. The rain intensified. No random tourists would show up. Went down to the concrete room. I set up the lights and started taking photographs. Worked methodically, page by page. Cryptographic tables, instructions, examples of encryption. Some pages are handwritten. Notes from military communicators, especially valuable for collectors. The process took an hour. I took about 100 pictures. Carefully put the books back and went upstairs. I cloaked the hatch and prepared to descend when I heard voices. The very greedy people Charlie had warned about had finally come for their treasure. Two silhouettes were walking up the slope uncertainly with constant stops. One was cursing, complaining about the slippery rocks. The other was shining a powerful spotlight. "Are you sure it's here?" the first one asked. Carl said between 2 large rocks. They were approaching the plateau. I squeezed the grip of my revolver. 2 young boys against an experienced ranger. The odds weren't bad. But it was better to avoid confrontation. The lads reached the hatch, aimed the searchlight at the rocks, and began to dismantle the camouflage. "That's it!" Carl wasn't lying. "This is a real military bunker. You don't mess around for that kind of money." One went down into the bunker. A moment later, there were enthusiastic shouts. "Found it! Lots of military books, real spy stuff, and take them all." Carl said each one could be worth thousands of quid. I stood up from behind cover and spoke loudly. "National Park Service Ranger, get out of the bunker now and get upstairs." The voice from the bunker was momentarily hushed. Then there was a squawk and a muffled curse. The guy upstairs froze, pointing the searchlight in my direction. In the bright light, I saw a young face contorted with fear and confusion. "Did you hear the command?" I repeated, stepping out from behind the boulder. Hands in plain sight, no sudden movements. "Hey, Mike!" the guy shouted downstairs. "There's a cop down here." "Not a cop, a ranger, but that's not much of a difference to you. Let your mate get up." Slowly. The guy upstairs was in his early 20s, skinny, wearing jeans and a college jacket. A student, not a thug. His hands shook as he held the spotlight. From the bunker came the sounds of hurried packing. "Mister, we haven't done anything wrong," the student spoke. "We're just studying history. We were told there was an old military facility here." "Says who?" "One bloke. Carl. I met him at a bar in Merced. He collects military stuff." The second guy emerged from the hatch with a rucksack, obviously stuffed with the contents of the container. Also young, a little older than the first. Students at the local university. "ID," I demanded. They reluctantly pulled out their driving licenses. Mike Thompson, 22, and Danny Rogers, 20, both from Merced, clean records, no offenses. What did this Carl guy tell you? That there was an abandoned bunker in the mountains with military documents, Mike replied. He said collectors pay good money for such things. We thought since no one wanted it anyway. Abandoned doesn't mean nobody's. This is national park land, and what you've taken are historical artifacts. I moved closer to Mike. Open the rucksack. He reluctantly unzipped the zip. Inside were all the cipher books from the container. Do you know how many years in prison you get for stealing federal property? I asked. The boys looked at each other. Danny was ready to cry. Mr. Ranger, we didn't know. Carl said it was nobody's. We can take it all back and never, ever, ever again. Quiet. I was assessing the situation. 2 terrified students breaking the law for the first time in their lives. No intent, just greed and stupidity, just like when I was 17 and stole my neighbor's car. Mike suddenly reached into his jacket pocket. I instinctively grabbed for my revolver. Take it easy. Let me see your hands, I shouted. I'm sorry, He slowly pulled out a folding knife. Carl gave us this, said we might need it. Cheap camping knife, 8-centimeter blade. Danny got one of those too. Did he teach you how to threaten people? I asked. No, Danny answered quickly. I was just saying, anything can happen in the mountains. Wild animals, snakes. I took the knives away from them. The situation was becoming clearer. Some Carl was using naive students to do his dirty work, even giving them weapons in case they resisted. He stood aside and they risked their freedom. This Carl, where can I find him? We don't know, Mike replied. We met at the Golden Nugget Bar 3 days ago. He bought us a beer, told us about the bunker. He said if we found anything of value, to meet us there tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Phone number? Address? He didn't give me anything. All he gave me was a name, Carl. I held the torch up to their faces. The fear was real. They really had no idea who they were dealing with. Sit on the rocks. Put your hands on your knees. The boys obediently sat down. Danny was crying quietly. Mike tried to maintain the remnants of dignity, but his lips trembled. Mr. Ranger, he spoke. We are ready to return everything and pay the fine. We have some money. How old are you? I interrupted. I'm 22. He's 20. Families? I have a girlfriend, Danny replied. We were going to get married after graduation, and he has a single mom working 2 jobs. I looked at them and saw myself 26 years ago. The same fear, the same stupidity, the same despair. Only I was lucky. My neighbor was an understanding person. Get up! They jumped up as if stung. Listen carefully. Now you take your rucksacks, but no books, and you go down to the car. You forget the way here. You forget about Carl. You don't show up at the bar tomorrow. If anyone asks, you haven't met anyone. You haven't found anything. Danny wanted to say something, but Mike interrupted him. Shut up, Danny. He understood faster. You're letting us go? For now. But if I find out one of you is breaking the law again, I'll remember this meeting. And then I'll tell the prosecutor not only about the theft, but also about the gun you brought. We get it, Mike replied quickly. Thank you. Thank you very much. They grabbed their empty rucksacks and hurried up the path. At the edge of the plateau, Danny turned around. Mr. Ranger, why are you letting us go? I hesitated to answer. Because greed steals more from people than they can steal themselves. Go home and live honestly. The sound of their footsteps dissolved into the night. I was left alone with a container of ciphers and the weight of my own doubts. In my pocket were the films I had shot, my ticket to money. In my hands were the cryptographic codes that I was required by law to hand over to my superiors. I sat down on a boulder and pulled out a thermos. The coffee was cold, but I needed the caffeine to keep my thoughts clear. Letting the boys go, I made a choice in their favor. But what about my own choice? We can take the films, develop them, and find a buyer. Give the codes to the superiors as they should be. Everyone would be happy. I'd get the money, and the historians would get the artifacts. But something was stopping me. A neighbor's words from back in 1965. The Navy will teach you discipline. Not only discipline, but honesty to yourself. If I sold copies of the ciphers, how would I be different from the students I'd just let go? Took the tapes out of his pocket. 4 black boxes with secrets written on them. My chance at a new life. And my chance to be who I thought I was. The solution came suddenly and definitively. I opened the first box and began to pull out the film. The glossy tape slipped out of my hands and hung in the wind. Then the second, third, fourth. No one would be interested in the blown-out footage. I collected the cipher books in a container, closed it, and got up. Tomorrow morning I'll hand over the find to my superiors. I'll be reprimanded for unauthorized opening of the bunker, but I'll retain the right to look myself in the eye. It took more than an hour to descend in the dark. I slipped a few times on wet rocks, but made it without serious injury. In the trailer, I put the container on the table and went to bed. For the first time in days, sleep came easily and without nightmares. On the morning of the 26th of September, I woke up with a clear head for the first time in a week. No nightmares, no agonizing doubts, only a calm confidence in the rightness of the decision I had made. At 9 o'clock in the morning came to the station chief, Bill Harrison, with a metal container. I told him about the discovery of an abandoned military bunker and the cryptographic codes inside. Passed on a detailed report, omitting only the nighttime photography and meeting with the students. Bill was impressed with the find and promised to deliver the container to the service headquarters. After receiving a mild reprimand for opening a potentially dangerous object on my own, I went back to my normal duties. But in the evening I decided to check on the hermit Charlie. I reached his campsite by sunset. The camp was empty. An extinguished fire, a clean tent. No sign of recent occupancy. There was a folded piece of paper on the large rock where we had been talking, pressed against a cobblestone. I unfolded the note. Uneven handwriting, simple words. "You made the right choice. Good luck, Ranger." Charlie disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared, probably gone to other mountains, away from the lure of civilization. Strange old man. How did he even know about my choice? I didn't tell anyone about what happened that night. 3 months later, I received a letter from service headquarters. The cryptographic codes were transferred to the National Archives, where they were added to the collection of Cold War documents. The bunker was sealed until its fate was decided. Perhaps it would become part of the park's historical exhibit. For finding an object of cultural significance, I was commended and given a bonus of $500. Not 100,000, but enough to repair the Jeep and buy new equipment. Mike and Danny's students never met again. I hope they took advice and found honest ways to deal with their financial problems. Yosemite taught me an important lesson. Real treasures don't lie in abandoned bunkers. They are found in moments when you can look at yourself in the mirror and not look away. On the 17th of November 1986, the White Sands Ranger Station duty log had the standard entry. Carter received Clark's personal effects for shipment to relatives. But among the old compasses and faded field diaries lay a military map from 1955. On the back was a message addressed to him personally. Daniel Carter, 38, Ranger 2nd Class. He was known in the park as a silent loner who favored the remote routes of the western frontier. 8 years in the Marines had taught him discipline and patience, but few knew why the former Marine really came to White Sands. In 1952, his older brother Thomas, a medical lieutenant, volunteered for an endurance enhancement program at White Sands Missile Range. After a series of experimental injections, he was placed in a closed hospital, and a month later the military informed the family that he had escaped. The search was called off, and the case was closed. Dan didn't believe it. Years of information gathering had brought him here, to the border between a national park and America's most secret military facility, White Sands. 275 square miles of snow-white gypsum dunes between the San Andres and Sacramento ranges. Trinity's first atomic explosion 60 miles to the north. Hundreds of missile tests, closed zones, military patrols along the borders. The western sector of the park is a special place. Here the dunes meet the San Andres foothills, old mines and abandoned military roads, an area that other rangers avoid. A map lay on the table. A military topographical survey dated July 1955. In the J14 quadrant, among the elevation marks and military roads, a neat badge and a signature in pencil. Hangar 18. On the back is a cryptic note from an unknown person. Daniel, I knew you'd come for the truth. I'm leaving you the coordinates. Your brother was on list number 7. Be careful of me. November 1986, 5:47 a.m. Dan Carter turned off the engine of a utility jeep 3 miles from the target coordinates. The thermometer read 4 degrees Celsius. In the pre-dawn desert, any sound traveled for miles. It would have to be on foot from here. The military GPS was pointing at the western boundary of White Sands National Park. Here, the white gypsum dunes transitioned smoothly into the rocky foothills of the San Andres Range. The boundary between the park and the military training ground was blurred and in some places not marked at all, an ideal place to hide a secret facility. The coordinates led Dan to a low rock formation, ordinary weathered rocks of reddish sandstone, like hundreds of them in the desert. The systematic search took over an hour. The sun had already risen above the horizon when Dan noticed an unnaturally neat pile of rocks and dry branches under an overhanging rock canopy. Behind the disguise was a ventilation shaft, a square hole about 1 meter by 1 meter, covered by a massive grate. The metal was rusted, but the structure was solid. The padlock still bore the embossed letters, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, 1951. Cold air with the smell of machine oil and old concrete wafted from the depths. Somewhere down below, machinery hummed monotonously, either fans or a generator. Near the entrance, Dan found fresh Army boot prints, a distinctive tread pattern, clear prints no more than 2 days old, and the butt of a filtered Marlboro cigarette. Unusual, the military traditionally prefer Camel without a filter. Dan used an Army multi-tool to saw through the shackle of the lock. The hardened steel didn't give in immediately. The job took about 20 minutes. The grate opened with a long creak. The concrete shaft went down at a 30-degree angle. There were rusty drips on the walls and metal braces every 1.5 meters. Some were wobbling, but most were holding firmly. For the first 15 meters, the descent was relatively gentle. Then there were signs in black paint: closed zone, authorized personnel only, radiation danger, and below, almost erased by time, the notice, Object 18, Level 1. Suddenly there came the murmur of diesel engines from above. Dan switched off his torch and quickly made his way up to the exit. 100 meters from his position, 2 sand-colored Army Humvees stopped. No identification marks, the license plates painted over. 4 military men in camouflage without stripes began to circle the area. The wind carried scraps of conversation. The junior was reporting a clean perimeter and non-functioning sensors. The commander had ordered increased patrols after the Clark incident. His last words were particularly clear. If you find any intruders, act without warning. The facility is officially defunct. He repeated the phrase twice. One of the soldiers headed toward the rock where Dan was hiding. He stopped 20 paces away, looked around. Dan pressed himself against the rocks, holding his breath. The soldier stood for another minute, then turned around, tossing something about coyotes. The patrol loaded into cars and drove away. Dan waited another 15 minutes before returning to the mine. Now the situation was clear. The site was secure, the military knew about it. But why hadn't the cut lock been replaced? The answer was around the corner of the tunnel. A massive steel door with a state-of-the-art electronic lock completely blocked the passage. A red light signaled that it was locked. To the left of the door, an old Army toolbox stood in a niche. Inside, instead of tools, there were folders with documents. The covers were labeled "Totally Secret." The first photograph is a black and white group shot. 12 people in white coats against a concrete wall. The caption at the bottom, "Medical personnel of the Hangar 18 project, July 1952, White Sands Proving Ground." In the front row, third from the left, is a young officer with lieutenant's badges on his coat collar. Thomas Carter, Dan's older brother. Dan spent the next hour going through the paperwork. Medical records with numbers instead of names, experiment protocols, radiation tolerance study, testing of MK-series psychotropic drugs, long-term effects of combined exposure. Behind the dry scientific language were human lives. Volunteer soldiers who were promised they could help America win the Cold War, a program to create super soldiers capable of surviving a nuclear conflict. A separate folder contained photographs from various years, underground laboratories, medical equipment, test subjects. The early pictures are of young boys in uniform. The later ones showed prematurely aged men with blank stares. Dan recognized the familiar slumped figure in the 1978 photo. An elderly man in a lab coat stood with his back to the camera. Characteristic posture, scars on his left arm. Raymond Clark, the ranger whose map led him here, officially dead 3 weeks ago. But this photo is from 1978, 26 years after his brother Dan disappeared. Clark was in his early 30s. He worked here from the beginning. The last document is a color photograph. 6 men in white coats in front of a steel door labeled Hangar 18, Level 3. In the center is Thomas, aged, gray-haired, but alive. Next to him is Clark, signed Project Hangar 18, Test Hash 7, July 1978, approved to proceed to Phase 3. On the back is a note. Subjects are stable, regeneration confirmed, aging has been slowed, mirror protocol activated, isolation required, Dr. Schmidt. A mechanical clanking sounded in the silence of the tunnel. The lock's red indicator blinked and turned green. The heavy deadbolts pulled away. The door began to open. Bright light poured in from the corridor. The silhouette of a man stepped into the semi-darkness of the tunnel. Dan retreated into the shadows, clutching his brother's photograph. The next second, he recognized the entrant, Raymond Clark, alive and well. "Hello, Daniel," Clark said. "I knew you'd come. Your brother is waiting for you downstairs. It's time to learn the truth about Angara 18. Raymond Clark stood in the doorway, alive, though officially dead for 3 weeks. He looked to be in his 60s, his gray hair neatly slicked back, deep wrinkles furrowing his forehead. He wore a white lab coat over an unmarked military uniform. Clark gestured for Dan to follow him. They entered a brightly lit corridor. Bundles of cables and conduits stretched along the walls. Every 10 meters there were steel doors with signs. Some of the rooms had glass windows. Inside they could see lab equipment and blinking instrument indicators. Along the way, Clark told his story, how he'd tried to leave the project in 1972, taken a job as a ranger, hoped to forget, but the past wouldn't let go. He began to notice oddities in the park. Unexplained magnetic anomalies, areas of dead vegetation, traces of underground utilities where they shouldn't be. When Clark had gathered enough evidence and was preparing to hand it over to the press, they came for him. They faked an accident, a fall off a cliff. In reality, he was returned to the underground complex. Not as a researcher, but as a prisoner with privileges. They put him in charge of the archives, keeping track of documentation. They descended the metal stairs to the second level. Here, the atmosphere was different. The corridors were wider, the ceilings higher. Along the walls were laboratories with transparent partitions. Behind the glass, Dan could see centrifuges, microscopes, refrigerated chambers with biomaterials. Clark stopped at a door labeled Archive 2. He put his palm to the fingerprint scanner. The mechanism clicked and the heavy door slid aside. The archive room resembled a library. In the center was a desk with a computer terminal. Clark walked over to one of the cabinets and typed in a code on a digital panel. From a drawer, he pulled out a bulky folder. On the cover were black letters, Carter T., Test Subject #7, Active Phase. Inside was Thomas Carter's life history for the past 30 years. Medical records, test results, psychological profiles, charts of health indicators, scans of internal organs. Dan leafed through the pages with growing concern. Early reports had described Thomas as a promising subject with high adaptability. By the mid-60s, there were notes about emotional instability and attempts at unauthorized abandonment. After 1965, the nature of the records changed. They now referred to successful correction of behavioral patterns and optimal integration with the mirror protocol. Medical indicators showed abnormalities, delayed cellular aging, increased tissue regeneration, and changes in DNA structure. Clark explained that Dan's brother was alive and working on level 3 of the complex. After a failed escape attempt, he was subjected to intensive therapy. Thomas's personality had undergone a change. He'd become a different person, dedicated to the project. The way to the third level was through the central lift. The car moved slowly with frequent stops. On each floor, security systems were activated, retinal scans, fingerprint checks, voice analysis. The complex seemed almost deserted. They had not met a single person during the entire descent. Clark explained that the project had been canceled in 1984. Most of the staff had been evacuated. Only key personnel and those who couldn't be let out remained. The lift doors opened on the third level. There was a different atmosphere here. The walls were painted gray, the lighting dimmed. The air was stale, smelling of chemicals and something organic. The corridor stretched for 100 meters. On either side were massive steel doors with small windows made of reinforced glass. Each door had a light above it, either red or green. Clark called these rooms isolation rooms. They held subjects whose bodies reacted unpredictably to the experiments. Some of the doors were welded shut. Behind one of them, something thudded against the walls. At the end of the corridor was a laboratory with transparent walls. Inside, bent over an electron microscope, a man in a white coat was working. Gray hair, slouching shoulders. He didn't turn around when Dan and Clark entered. It wasn't until Clark called his name that the man looked up. Dan recognized his brother immediately. The same facial features, the familiar scar on his chin from falling off his bike as a child. But something was wrong. Thomas's eyes remained blank, without a glimmer of recognition. He looked at Dan like a stranger, assessing and cold. When he spoke, his voice was monotone, emotionless. Thomas listed the project's accomplishments like a memorized lesson. Accelerated tissue regeneration at 4 times the normal rate, slowing the aging process by 70%, resistance to radiation and most known pathogens, increased physical strength and endurance. He then asked Dan for a blood sample, standard procedure for all visitors to level 3. Dan didn't suspect a trick, rolled up his sleeve. The needle entered the vein and dark blood filled the tube. Thomas put the sample into the analyzer, a compact device about the size of a microwave. The machine buzzed, and the data lines ran on the screen. A minute later, a beep sounded. The results were unexpected. The graph on the monitor showed abnormal peaks in certain parts of the genome. Thomas scrutinized the data, then turned to his brother. In an impassive tone, he explained, "Dan is a carrier of a rare genetic mutation, a natural predisposition to the mirror protocol, 1 in a million. That's why he was brought here." Clark turned pale upon hearing those words. Dan demanded an explanation. Thomas continued in the same steady voice. All of the subjects' relatives were being monitored. Dan had shown signs in 1981, abnormally fast healing after a car accident, resistance to infection. Serving in the Marine Corps was no accident. It was a test of how the body would react to extreme stress. Dan passed all the tests. Now it was time to activate the latent genes. The realization of the truth struck like a bolt of lightning. His whole life had been an experiment. Every choice, every decision, everything was under control. At that moment, a siren wailed. The red emergency lights flashed under the ceiling. A mechanical voice announced the start of the isolation protocol. Thomas calmly walked over to the terminal on the wall, entered the code, explained he was activating the sweep system. In 15 minutes, the lower level would be flooded. Then the water will come up here. Total destruction of all traces of the project. Clark rushed for the exit, but the massive bulkheads were already lowering, cutting off escape routes. Somewhere down below, powerful pumps were running. Water rumbled through the pipes. Thomas opened the metal case that stood on the lab table. Inside, ampules of greenish liquid lay in special slots, a concentrated mirror serum, the culmination of 30 years of research. He explained to his brother a single injection would activate dormant genes. Dan would become the same, enhanced, virtually immortal. Emotions would disappear, but that was a small price to pay for perfection. Water began to seep under the lab door. Puddles formed on the floor. It was only minutes away from complete flooding. Thomas held out a syringe of serum to his brother. The choice was simple: take the injection or die with the sinking base. The water was rising fast. Already it covered the floor of the laboratory with a layer of 10 centimeters, cold and murky. The emergency lights were coloring it red. Dan stood in front of his brother, clutching a syringe of greenish liquid in his hand. Time seemed to stop. Memories flashed through his mind. How Thomas had taught him to ride a bike, protected him from the older kids in the yard, read him adventure novels at bedtime. Now there was a different man in front of him, Cold, calculating, devoid of emotion. Thomas looked at him like a laboratory specimen, waiting for a decision. Dan searched his brother's eyes for a shadow of the old man. He tried to remind himself of the past, of his mother, who waited until the last minute for her eldest son's return, of their joint hikes in the mountains, of their vow to always protect each other. Thomas listened without emotion. His voice remained mechanical as he repeated the benefits of the serum longevity, immunity to disease, superhuman abilities. The price, just emotions and memories. Clark, meanwhile, was working at the control panel in the far corner of the lab. The water was already up to his knees. The old ranger had opened the security panel trying to reach the emergency systems. He found an opportunity, an old technical airlock in the southern sector, built back in the 50s as an emergency exit for personnel, but the system had been shut down decades ago. Clark connected the bare wires trying to power the mechanism. Sparks sputtered from the panel. A flash illuminated the lab. The discharge passed through the old man's body, throwing him back against the wall. Dan rushed to him, but it was too late. Charred clothes, the smell of burnt flesh. Clark was still breathing, but he had only seconds to live. His lips moved, giving out his last words about the airlock in the southern sector. The water rose to his waist. Dan turned back to the panel. The circuitry had been partially damaged by the discharge, but the main connections were intact. Power had to be restored, and the access code entered. Thomas watched his attempts with scientific interest, commented on the chances of success, less than 5%, suggested a more rational solution, take the serum. Dan worked feverishly. The water reached his chest, making it difficult to move. His fingers were numb with cold. Finally, the indicator light on the panel turned green. The system had come to life. But the joy was premature. Activating the gateway required a biometric key, the palm print of an authorized employee. Clark's dead. Thomas refused to help. That left only one option. Dan looked at the syringe in his hand. A partial dose might give him the strength to survive underwater, to make it to the airlock. But what would be left of his identity? He thought back to his service in the Marines, the comrades he lost in Lebanon, his oath to protect his country and its citizens. If he took this dose and became like Thomas, who would tell the truth about what was happening here? Dan stared at the syringe in his hand. The greenish liquid promised salvation, but at what cost? He turned to his brother, searching his eyes for a shadow of doubt. Nothing, just cold calculation. The decision came suddenly. Dan dropped the syringe to the floor and rushed over to Clark's body. The water was already up to his chest, making it difficult to move. He grabbed the dead ranger's hand, dragging it to the control panel. Dan pressed Clark's palm against the scanner. The second of waiting seemed like an eternity. The indicator flashed red, then again. On the third time, a green signal. The system had accepted the print. The mechanism was working. Somewhere in the depths of the complex, servos hummed. Dan rushed for the exit, leaving his brother in the flooded laboratory. Thomas made no attempt to follow him, only watched with the same detached curiosity. The water was rising fast. Dan ducked, swam through the opening. The emergency lights were out, so he had to navigate by feel. His lungs burned from lack of oxygen. The corridor led him to the technical airlock. The old wheel did not give way immediately. He was running out of energy, and his consciousness was beginning to fade. With a final effort, Dan turned the mechanism. Water rushed into the opening, carrying him down the vertical shaft. The metal steps hurt his hands, but he climbed upwards, clinging with all his might. Finally, a hatch to the surface. Dan pushed it open with his shoulder and fell out onto the sand. The dawn sun was blinding, his lungs gulping for air. Dawn colored the dunes pink. The desert looked the same as it always did, serene, eternal. There was no sign of the underground complex. Only a small dip in the sand marked the spot where the ventilation entrance had been. Dan lay on the warm sand, looking up at the sky. His body ached from the bruises, his lungs burning from lack of oxygen. But he was alive, and still human. The following weeks passed like a blur. The official investigation wrote Clark's disappearance off as an accident. There was no mention of the underground base. Military patrols stepped up security in the western sector, but only formally because of increased poaching. Dan went back to work as a ranger. His colleagues noticed the change. He became quieter, avoided company. They blamed it on the stress of losing his partner. Only Dan knew the truth. By day, he patrolled the park, performing routine duties. At night, he'd return to where the entrance to the compound was. He listened to the sounds underground. Sometimes he thought he could hear generators running, pumps pumping. The physical injuries healed quickly, but the psychological scars remained. Nightmares haunted him every night. Flooded corridors, a dead Clark, his brother's empty eyes. Sometimes, looking out over the white dunes, he would see a silhouette with gray hair on the horizon. The figure would appear for a second and then disappear. In the breeze, he could hear his brother's voice repeating formulas and numbers. The dreams became vivid, almost tangible. In them, he was back in the lab, again facing a choice. He woke up in a cold sweat, unsure if he was in reality. A month after the incident, Dan received a letter with no return address. Inside was a picture of a group of scientists at the entrance to Hangar 18 and a note, "The project is not complete. We are watching." He burned the letter, but the message was clear. He's being watched. Perhaps he was part of a new experiment, living proof of the success of the Mirror program. Dan continued to work in the park, patrolling the dunes every day, keeping an eye out for tourists, filling out reports. But now he had another mission, to protect the secret of Angara 18, to keep the curious out of the danger zone. Sometimes, in rare moments of peace, he thought of his brother. Was Thomas alive? Had he managed to get out, or had the base become his grave? There were no answers, only the white dunes stretching to the horizon, and the silence of a desert that held its secrets. There are some cases in the National Park Service archives that are closed without question. In a ranger's report dated the 7th of July, 1997, there is a terse note. Human remains found in lost horse mine side tunnel. What the report doesn't say is how this discovery divided one ranger's life into before and after, and that some disappearances in national parks have more complex causes than official reports indicate. My name is Kyle Webb, and I'm 39 years old. Prior to working for the National Park Service, I spent 9 years with the California Highway Patrol. From 1985 to 1994, I patrolled the highways of Riverside County, dealing with accidents, violators, and sometimes crime. I quit after a conflict with my superiors. I discovered a corruption scheme in the department and couldn't keep quiet. It cost me my career. In 1995, I applied to the NPS, looking for a quieter job and an opportunity to start again. I have been a ranger in Joshua Tree National Park for 2 years. It is 3,200 square kilometers of the Mojave Desert with unique trees and rock formations. Tourists see the spectacular scenery and take pictures. Rangers know the other side. Extreme temperature swings from 40 degrees during the day to sub-zero temperatures at night, rugged areas where it's easy to get lost, and abandoned gold rush mines. My area of responsibility includes the Lost Horse Mine area, an abandoned gold mine closed to the public due to the risk of cave-ins. The nearest ranger post is 25 kilometers away. Radio communication in mines and canyons is unstable. You have to rely on your own experience and make decisions on your own. The main problems in my area are the so-called miners who ignore the prohibitions and keep digging in abandoned mines in search of gold or precious metals. Tourists who underestimate the dangers of the desert. My police experience helps. I notice traces that others miss. I analyze situations as potential accident scenes. Sometimes it saves lives. Sometimes it creates problems with superiors who prefer not to rock the boat. On July 1st, 1997, during my morning patrol, I noticed fresh tire tracks on the dirt road leading to the abandoned mines. It was strange. The road had been closed for several years. That same day, I was approached by Bill Hayes, an auto mechanic from 29 Palms. His 22-year-old daughter Laura had gone missing a year ago while photographing abandoned mines for a college project. Bill was sure Laura had stumbled onto something dangerous in the Lost Horse Mine area. I didn't know then that this request for help would tie the park's past and present together in one tragic thread, and that the decisions I made would haunt me long after the Laura Hayes case was officially closed. At 7 in the morning, the thermometer read 23 degrees. By noon, it would be 40. I planned a routine patrol, checking campsites, checking trails, checking signs. My 1993 Jeep Cherokee started the first time, and the radio worked clearly. Bill Hayes, 54, an auto mechanic from 29 Palms, was waiting for me in the office. Worn jeans, calloused hands. "My daughter Laura went missing a year ago," he said. 22 years old, went to college, photographed abandoned mines for a history project. Bill showed a photograph, a girl with dark hair against the backdrop of the Joshua Tree Cliffs. Last called on the 15th of June, 1996. Said she found an interesting mine. "Have the police been looking?" I asked him. 3 weeks. Found her car at Hidden Valley. Nothing else. Case closed. Bill held out a photocopy of a page from his notebook. The girl's handwriting. Saw the cars at Lost Horse again. 2 pickup trucks. Men with torches going into the mine. I'll try to get closer tomorrow. Showed to the police. Said junkies looking for a hideout. Checked superficially. Bill put the photo away. Just take another look around the neighborhood. With a professional eye. I agreed to check out the Lost Horse mine. Bill left the room and drove off. By 10 in the morning, I was at the dirt track to the mine. Fresh tire tracks on the damp ground from the night's rain. Wide treads a few days old. The road has been closed since 1994 after a collapse. The chain was removed and thrown to the side. Someone had a key or tools. I followed the tracks on foot. The radio hissed with interference. Communication is unstable in the canyons. At the mine entrance, I found Marlboro cigarette butts, plastic bottles, a candy bar wrapper. The trash is fresh. I switched on the torch and entered the tunnel, the smell of damp metal and chemistry. After 40 meters, the shaft branched off. The boot prints went to the right, into the main tunnel. In a side niche, I found a metal container the size of a suitcase. Next to it were rubber gloves, a respirator, glass tubes with liquid residue. The smell of chemistry grew stronger. I photographed the find with a film camera. The container contained plastic bottles with transparent liquid, syringe packs, and safety instructions. The text is washed out, but I could make out, "At a temperature not exceeding 25 degrees Celsius, hazard class 3. A clandestine lab? But the equipment's too professional for regular drug dealers. Deeper down, he found a laminated map of the area with red crosses on it. 5 marks within a 3-kilometer radius. Handwriting says, Stash Hash 3, July 1996. Someone's been using the mine as a warehouse for over a year. He heard footsteps at the entrance, turned off the lantern. 3 men, talking quietly and indistinctly, heard words like, "Check Sector 3. The samples should be there. If the cops poke around again..." I pressed myself against the wall. In the semi-darkness, I could make out silhouettes. 3 in work clothes, 1 with a walkie-talkie. They moved confidently. "Hey, mate!" called out a voice. I was noticed. Turning around, he turned the torch on their faces. "Ranger Webb, National Park Service. The area is closed." 3 middle-aged, tanned men. 1 has a metal detector, another a homemade mine detector, the third a shovel. Gold prospectors. "We have permission to excavate," said the former. "Excavations are prohibited in the national park. Documents." They looked at each other. The atmosphere was heating up. There was only one way out. The radio didn't work. "We can share the finds," said the second, showing a copy of the same map. "Bought it from a local old guy for 50 quid. Name's Joe. Lives by the road on Keys View." They began to circle. "The problem is we only have one map. And you found something interesting." Pulled out his walkie-talkie. "Central, this is Webb. Code 10, 54 at Lost Horse Mine." "No need to call for backup," said the first. The ceiling creaked. The old bracing was failing. Stones splintered. "Everybody out! Now!" We jumped out seconds before the collapse. The entrance was half blocked. "Shit, our tools are in there!" One swore. Took a picture of their faces and the license plate of the Ford F-150 pickup. Showed their licenses. Tom, Mike, and Dan from Palm Springs. Just the usual easy money guys. "Leave the area immediately. If I see you again, I'll arrest you." They left. I stayed by the collapsed mine. In my rucksack, a map of the geocaches. In the camera, pictures of the containers. A notebook with the names of the perpetrators. Enough for a report. But what to write to the bosses? About the chemicals and the map? It would cause an investigation, a fuss. After the problems at the traffic police, he wanted to avoid scandals. Laura, on the other hand, disappeared here. Maybe she ran into the same people. If I don't say anything, I'm missing a lead. The decision was made by looking at a picture of a girl from Bill. Laura deserved answers. Back at the base, I made a brief report on the intruders and the collapse. I didn't mention the containers and the map. Not yet. First, I had to find old Joe and find out what he knew about the caches and the missing girl. The night passed restlessly. The map with the red crosses kept me awake. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I was on my way to look for old Joe. Temperature 19 degrees, clear. Drove by memory and paper maps. Found the trailer after an hour. An old 1970s Airstream parked in the shade by the side of the road. Next to a battered 1980 Chevrolet pickup truck and a makeshift awning made of tarps. Smoke was billowing from the chimney. An old man opened the door, 70 years old, gray beard, faded flannel shirt. His eyes were clear, attentive. "Joe Carter," he introduced himself. "And you're the ranger who caught the gold diggers at Lost Horse yesterday." "How do you know?" "Tom Rivers stopped by, complained about losing his equipment to the collapse." Joe grinned. "Come on in, there's coffee." The inside of the trailer is Spartan. Folding furniture, a gas cooker, shelves of tinned food. On the wall, there are topographical maps of the area marked with colored buttons. "Tom said you sold them the geocache map," I began. "I sold a copy. I have the original on me." Joe pulled a tattered paper from a desk drawer. Prospectors in the 1930s did hide finds in the mines, but not just gold. The map was more detailed than the one I'd seen. 12 marks instead of 5, with dates from 1931 to 1938. Next to the Lost Horse mine, it was marked June 1996. What does this mark mean? Joe poured coffee into metal mugs. "There was a girl who came here a year ago. Laura was called Laura. Took pictures of the mines. Asked about the history of the area. Smart, not like those treasure hunters." My heart beat faster. What did she want to know? "Asked about the strange people by the mines. Saw them a few times at night. I said drug dealers use the tunnels as laboratories. That's how it was in the 1980s too." Joe sipped his coffee. "But Laura thought something else was going on down there. Showed pictures of machines, people in masks. Said the equipment was too expensive for regular junkies." "Have you seen these pictures?" "A scene, professional containers, protective suits. Looks more like a military operation." Joe stood up, walked over to the map on the wall. "Laura was asking about the Lost Horse side tunnels. The old mine plans show passageways that aren't on modern maps." He pointed to a mark in red pencil. "Northeast tunnel, about 200 meters from the main entrance, stoned back in the 1940s, but the passage remains. Laura wanted to check it out." "And then what happened?" "I don't know, haven't seen any more." Joe turned back to the table. "But a week after she disappeared, some uniformed men showed up outside the mine, military or feds. They were hauling something out in special containers." Police instinct told me the old man was telling the truth. There were too many details to make up. "Can you show me the way to the side tunnel?" Joe shook his head. "I'm getting old for rock climbing, but I can draw a diagram." He picked up a pencil and a piece of paper. "From the main entrance of Lost Horse, go north 200 meters. There's a rock scree at the foot of the cliff. Look for a metal post, remnants of old markings. There's a gap between the boulders." I took a picture of the diagram. "If anything happens, call the park office. Ask for Ranger Webb." "Be careful, son," Joe said goodbye. Laura was a brave girl, perhaps too brave. The next day, I took a reinforced kit. Extra batteries for the torch, rope, first aid kit, water for the whole day. The radio was not working well, but at least it was picking up the main frequency. The main entrance to the mine was blocked after yesterday's cave-in. I had to find a side passage using Joe's scheme. The rock scree, the metal pole, the gap between the boulders, everything was in place. I squeezed through the narrow gap. Behind him, a sloping tunnel opened up, leading deep into the rock. Smelled of mold and something else. I switched on the torch. The tunnel was wider than the main tunnel, but lower. I had to crouch down. 50 meters later, I came across an obstacle. An old wooden shield with the inscription, "Danger Landslide." Behind the shield, the tunnel continued, but it was blocked with stones. On the right, I noticed a narrow passage. Someone had removed part of the rubble. I squeezed through the gap. Behind it was a small chamber, about 4 meters in diameter. The lantern illuminated something I didn't expect to see. In the corner of the cell, covered by an old tarpaulin, lay human remains. My heart jumped. I took out my camera, took a few pictures, then came closer. The skeleton was partially decomposed, but much was preserved. The dry desert climate slows decay. Clothes, denim jacket, faded t-shirt, hiking boots. Nearby, a rusty bracelet engraved Laura Hayes and a broken camera. His hands shook as he took pictures of the find site. Bill's year of searching, hoping, and despair ended in that small chamber underground. I took a closer look at the remains. Skull intact, no obvious signs of violence on the bones. Could be an accident. Got lost in the tunnels, couldn't get out, or dehydration. Found a rucksack next to the body. Inside, a notebook with notes, some films for the camera, a bottle of water. The last entry in the notebook dated the 15th of June, 1996. Side tunnel leads to the camera. Found signs of recent activity. Strange containers like the ones at the entrance. Someone is using the shaft for storage. Need more evidence. So, Laura did discover the stash house. Probably confronted whoever was guarding it. Checked the radio. Weak signal, but enough for a call. Central, this is Webb. Code 10, 54, coroner's assistance required. Lost horse mine, side entrance. Webb, say again, I can't hear you very well. You. Human remains have been discovered. Possible Laura Hayes, missing since June 1996. We need a coroner and backup. Copy that. The team is on its way. Stand by at the location. I sat down at the entrance to the cell and waited. My mind was jumbled. Found the girl, but too late. Bill would get answers, but at what cost? An hour later, the San Bernardino County coroner and a police detective arrived. Official procedures, taking pictures, packing up the remains. I handed over the photos and notes from Laura's notebook. Preliminary cause of death? Detective Martinez asked. Hard to tell without forensics, the coroner replied. Dehydration, hypothermia, possible head trauma from the fall? Called Bill that evening, asked him to come to the office. The hardest call I've ever had to make. Bill arrived half an hour later. He was stone-faced, preparing himself for bad news. I told him about the find in the side tunnel, showed him pictures of the bracelet and camera. He was silent for a long time, holding the pictures in his hands. Then he asked quietly, Did she suffer? I don't think so. Judging by the posture, just fell asleep and didn't wake up. The cold of a desert night. Bill nodded. Thanks for not abandoning the search. On the 6th of July, it was officially confirmed through dental records that the remains belonged to Laura Hayes. The missing persons case was closed. But it didn't close for me. Laura's notebook had mentions of containers and strange people. She died investigating the same thing I found in the main tunnel. Coincidence? Or something more? Independence Day began with an alarm bell. At 5 in the morning, the radio came to life. All units, suspicious activity at Lost Horse Mine, unknown persons with equipment, Ranger Webb, check the area. The temperature is 21 degrees, windy. 4th of July is one of the busiest days in the park. Staff are in short supply. Took the standard kit and drove to the mine. Lost Horse Mine found a familiar 1991 Ford F-150 and 2 other cars at Lost Horse Mine. Tom Rivers returned with reinforcements. Now there were 5 of them, a larger group. Men with shovels were digging at the collapsed entrance, clearing the passage. The area is closed. Stop work. Tom looked up. We have a geological survey permit. A large man in a camouflage shirt held out an official-looking document. Seals, signatures, the Desert Minerals Inc. logo, all the right stuff. Geological work in an area of recent death? We're looking for minerals, not corpses, snapped the thin man with the tattoo on his forearm. By the way, we heard you found something interesting up there. They knew about Laura's find, but the information wasn't public. The coroner was still doing the paperwork. How do you know about the find? Rumor has it, said Tom, showing a familiar map. Bought it from old Joe. Interesting grandfather. I went back to the Jeep and tried to contact the office. The radio didn't work well. The canyons were jamming the signal. I managed to get through to the dispatcher. Checked geological permit. number G4477SB, issued on the 3rd of July. Wait a minute. Webb, there's no such permit in the database. Last issued on the 15th of June, different number, forged documents. So these people aren't geologists. Then who are? And why would they want the mine now? Back to the group. Permit is invalid. Leave the area. Can we make a deal? The big one said. Paid for information on what the girl found. Containers, coordinates. Skinny showed part of the map from the tunnel. The old man said some interesting things for the right price. Where's Joe now? In a safe place. As long as we're here, he's fine. The threat was clear. He retreated to the jeep, keeping his hand at his holster. The atmosphere was instantly heated. 5 against 1. Reinforcements are an hour away. The radio doesn't work well. The situation is worse than yesterday. There are more people. They are more aggressive. Your radio isn't working, Tom said. We checked, and the nearest checkpoint is an hour away. They began to slowly surround me. 2 of them had crowbars in their hands, and the third had a folding knife. I retreated to the jeep with my hand on my holster. Suddenly a rumbling sound came from the shaft. The ground shook. Another collapse. Tim stayed inside, Tom shouted. Smoke was billowing from the entrance. Someone was screaming for help. Grab the lantern and the rope. Who's there? Our partner, checking the tunnels. I squeezed through a narrow gap in the rubble. The air inside the shaft was full of dust, and it was hard to breathe. I switched on my torch and moved down the main tunnel, calling out to the injured man. Tim, where are you? Here, in the side passage on the right, he shouted in a weak voice. I found him in a dead-end tunnel, crushed by a fallen wooden beam. A guy in his 30s, scared but conscious. His leg was jammed, but his bones seemed intact. Ranger Webb, we'll get him out now. I tied a rope around him and began to carefully clear the rubble. Any wrong move could cause another cave-in. After half an hour, freed the guy and helped him out. Thank you, said the large one. We owe you one. The duty is simple. Get out and don't come back. Tom came up last, holding out a note. Gold is cursed. Some secrets are better left in the ground. Joe. The next morning, I decided to go check on Joe. The trailer was parked in place, but the door was ajar. The inside was a mess, overturned furniture, scattered maps. There was a note on the floor, written in a trembling hand. Kyle, they made me tell you about the tunnels and the maps. Going somewhere safe. Don't come looking for me. The gold is cursed. Joe. The old man disappeared. Perhaps the searchers had really forced him to cooperate, or perhaps he had decided to go into hiding himself, having realized the danger. The next day, Chief Richardson reviewed my report and the complaint from Desert Minerals, Inc. The company claims they had permits and you were obstructing the work. I.D. are fake. Checked it through the database. They have a photo of you threatening with a gun. I didn't draw my weapon. The rescue of the injured man is in your favor, but this is the second incident in a week. Richardson set the papers aside. Official warning. Next incident, suspension from remote areas. And another thing. Federal agencies are inquiring about events at Lost Horse. Something about environmental safety. You're not hiding anything? No, sir, it's all in the report. But it wasn't true. The chemical containers and the connection to Laura's death were left out of the report. In the evening, he rang Bill. Forensics are complete. Cause of death is hypothermia and dehydration. Got lost in the tunnels. I see. Thank you for looking. The funeral is tomorrow. Come. There were 30 people at the funeral. Bill asked me to say the words. Laura sought the truth and wasn't afraid to go where others didn't dare. Sometimes the truth comes at a price, but without people like that, the world would be a darker place. After the ceremony, Bill handed over an old photograph of Laura. Let it remind you that you were doing the right thing. The next day, he filled in the final report. The missing tourist was found dead as a result of an accident, caused by hypothermia and dehydration. Case closed. Didn't mention the chemical containers, didn't write about the connection between Laura's death and the suspicious activity. Some truths are too complex for official records, but my conscience wouldn't let go. Laura had died investigating something important. Her record of strange people was not a figment of her imagination. Perhaps someday the truth will come out. In the meantime, Lost Horse Mine remains a closed zone, officially because of cave-ins, unofficially because some desert mysteries are better left alone. Laura's photograph lies in her desk drawer, a reminder of the price of truth. October in Joshua Tree is the best time of the year. The temperature stays around 25 degrees during the day, and the nights are cool but not cold. The tourist season is in full swing, and there is plenty to do. I've been reassigned to patrol the central routes, officially for better contact with visitors, unofficially, away from problem areas. Lost Horse Mine remains a closed area. At the entrance, new warning signs have been installed. The official reason is the critical condition of the structures, the threat of collapse. In reality, it's to prevent anyone else from poking their noses in there. The federal agents never showed up. Maybe the brass decided not to rock the boat, or maybe someone upstairs told them to shut it down. Either way, the investigation ended as abruptly as it had begun. Old Joe was never seen again. The trailer was removed a month after his disappearance. Relatives from Nevada, they say. The gold seekers were gone too. Tom Rivers and his company vanished as if they never existed. Bill Hayes called twice. The first time was to thank him for his search and to invite him to Laura's birthday party. I didn't go, too hard. The second call was in September. Bill had sold the house in 29 Palms and moved to his sister's place in Arizona. Said the desert had become a reminder of loss. "You know, Kyle," he said over the phone, "I'm grateful to know the truth. Uncertainty kills hope slowly, and the truth, even if it's painful, allows you to move on." Maybe he's right, but sometimes at night I think about the chemical containers in the mine, about Laura's notes about strange people, about the sudden interest of the feds. What if the girl didn't run into the usual drug dealers? What if there was something more serious going on in the desert? Sometimes I pull out Laura's photograph and remember the words spoken at her funeral. Without people who seek the truth, the world would be a darker place. But the truth has a price. Laura paid with her life. And how many other secrets do the silent canyons and abandoned mines of Joshua Tree hold? And now these stories are hushed, like the echoes of footsteps in the depths of a deserted mine. Each one is a reminder that behind the map of a national park may lie not just wildlife, but someone's pain, someone's loss, and someone's mystery. From Death Valley to snow-covered Denali, we followed in the footsteps of those who did not back down, who, against fear, loneliness, and pressure, took a step where most would have turned back. We may never know the whole truth, but it is this reticence that keeps us going, searching, listening, telling. Which of these stories made you think? Leave your mark in the comments and subscribe. There are many more stories to come that make the desert quieter and the truth closer.